what Boris Johnson says is that at this stage, Putin has made up his mind. He's going to go and he's going to do it. The way that I take it, and the way that I think Boris Johnson describes it, is that he's just reminding him that he can. I'm not sure he's saying, I am going to do this, but he's just a little reminder that, look, I'm the powerful figure here. I'm the one with all the nuclear weapons, or more nuclear weapons than you, certainly. And I think he's just saying, look, I can do this. This is what I can do.
Right, let's turn our attention to Russia now. Boris Johnson has claimed that Vladimir Putin threatened him with a missile strike, what he called an extraordinary phone call in the run-up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The revelations from Putin versus the West, a new BBC documentary looking at the ways in which world leaders have tried and failed to manage their relationship with Russia over the last 2 decades. It's been directed by Tim Stirzaker, and I spoke to him a little earlier and asked him if the invasion was on the horizon when they started work on the project.
The war in Ukraine seemed like it was nowhere, to be totally honest. We started in the summer of 2021, and at that stage, if you told me that by the end of our production, Russia would have launched a full-scale invasion and launched missiles at Kyiv and hundreds of thousands of people would have been injured, it would have just felt like a distant possibility. As the months went on and the war drums got louder and the possibility of something became more and more serious, we realised, gosh, this series we're making is going to be incredibly important and incredibly timely. And then when the war started and the scale of it became apparent, then we thought, okay, this really is the right time to be telling this story. And I mean, it made our job a lot harder in many ways, but it also brought home just why you do these things.
When you started working, because for lots of people go, particularly in the UK, go out their lives worrying about other things. It came slightly out of the blue, Russia suddenly invading Ukraine. Given that you've been working on it for a few months by that point, was it a case of the clues were there if we'd have bothered looking for them?
One thing that became apparent when we were making this series is that Ukraine, for Putin, has always been unique and has always been something that he's focused on. The first episode of the series looks at the invasion of Crimea and the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and what was done and not done by the West to try and push back at that stage. And I think just listening to things that Putin said around that time, you get a sense that it's there in his mind. But, you know, we've interviewed several former prime ministers. We interviewed, as well as Boris Johnson, David Cameron, Theresa May. We interviewed Francois Hollande, Jose Manuel Barroso. We interviewed Jens Stoltenberg for the series. We interviewed Zelensky himself for the series. In 2021, in the summer of 2021, everyone we were speaking to didn't think this was going to happen on this scale. I think it really did come as a surprise that he would do something this big.
And of course, the series is called Putin versus the West. And to some extent, the West didn't see it coming, didn't expect this to happen. But to what extent did Putin then not expect the West's reaction?
I would love to ask him that question myself. But I think the story we tell in the series does paint a picture of moments when you could understand why he would think that. I mean, the 2014 Crimea invasion, for example, there were lots of discussions at that stage as to whether or not to send lethal weapons to Ukraine. The Americans backed off, the Europeans didn't do it. There were questions about whether the sanctions should be tougher and bigger. Again, the Europeans backed off. At the end of that episode, Francois Hollande, in a moment of real self-reflection, sort of says, look, if you don't punish hard enough at first, you have to punish harder later on. And that's what we're seeing now. And I think in Syria, which the second episode focuses on, again, the West does not push back when there are moments when they could have. And I think it's just Putin could look at all of those moments and think, okay, maybe if I try something really big, maybe they won't push back as much as I thought. And that's obviously not been the case.
There's an extraordinary moment in this series where Boris Johnson recalls an extraordinary conversation with Vladimir Putin. Let's just take a listen to what he says happened.
You know, he threatened me at one point and said, Boris, I don't want to hurt you, but with a missile it would only take a minute or something like that. Jolly. But I think from the very relaxed tone that he was taking, the sort of air of detachment that he seemed to have, he was just playing along with my attempts to get him to negotiate.
Tim, it's obviously quite difficult to ascertain tone, both from Putin and Boris Johnson himself. How serious a threat do you think Putin intended that to be, and how seriously did Boris Johnson take it?
what Boris Johnson says is that at this stage, Putin has made up his mind. He's going to go and he's going to do it. The way that I take it, and the way that I think Boris Johnson describes it, is that he's just reminding him that he can. I'm not sure he's saying, I am going to do this, but he's just a little reminder that, look, I'm the powerful figure here. I'm the one with all the nuclear weapons, or more nuclear weapons than you, certainly. And I think he's just saying, look, I can do this. This is what I can do.
Just finally, in the longer term then, when people have seen the whole series, is there a calculation about Putin that the West has been getting wrong, do you think? Or is it actually, are we into a whole new phase now? And, Tony Blair, David Cameron tried sort of hugging him close and then keeping him at arm's length. Are we just into a whole completely new phase now, and actually this war in Ukraine is going to last a very long time?
I, like everybody else, hope that it doesn't, but all the signs are pointing towards what could be a very long war. Look, I think in the series, our focus was always to look at how the West deals with Putin. We knew from the outset that we were very unlikely to get really good top-level access in Russia to people close to Putin, certainly Putin himself. And so the story we were looking at is, how does the West deal with Putin? How has the West done that over the last 10 years? And how does that point towards where we are now? And as you say, I think you see David Cameron trying to, as his advisors say, de-ice Putin. You see some people using a much tougher approach. I mean, by the time it gets to the third episode, people are confronting Putin very directly and saying, look, if you do this, there will be serious consequences. The fact is, nothing seems to have worked. And I'm not sure what the answer is. If there was a simple answer, then someone might have tried it by now. But I think hopefully in watching the series, you just get a little bit of an insight into how those different approaches have been tried, and maybe somewhere in the middle there's a way out.
That was Tim Stirzaker. He's director of the new documentary Putin V The West, which you can catch on the BBC and on the iPlayer, of course. The award-winning producer of the series, Norma Percy, will be Mariella Frostrup's 2:00 interview. Tomorrow, we've had a development on this, though, the claim by Boris Johnson. The Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said that Boris Johnson's claims about Putin threatening him were untrue, or more precisely, it was a lie, he said. He claimed that Boris Johnson may have deliberately lied or failed to understand what the Russian leader was telling him. There were no threats with missiles, Peskov told a conference call with reporters this morning.